Welcome to the fourth and final of our series of presentations on the institution's routes to membership. This presentation is titled Non-Standard Routes to Membership and Recent Changes. If you're attending this presentation, I would assume that you're seeking to understand a little more about the mutual recognition agreements, the research and development route, and recent changes regarding the new route to the AI Struct-T grade. So I hope this session is enlightening for you. I will now hand over to our Deputy Chief Executive, Darren Byrne, who will give you the presentation.
Thanks very much, Darren. And thanks very much to the East Midlands Regional Group for organising these presentations. As Darren has said, this particular presentation will deal with non-standard routes and recent changes. It is the last presentation in a series of four. Previously, we have covered an overview of routes to membership and, in particular, academic qualifications. The second session was IPD and the professional review interview, and the most recent session, the exam and how to prepare. Now, as Darren has said, all of these presentations are being recorded. They will be edited and then put onto the institution website. So look under the East Midlands Regional Group. They'll also be put on the institution's YouTube account. So hopefully, if you've missed any of the previous presentations, you can go back and have a look at them. Or if you just need a bit of a refresher, looking over some matters of detail, feel free to look at the presentations. Clearly, any questions, anything that you're uncertain of, always ask the institution's membership department. There are no stupid questions. We'd much rather you contact us, ask us for clarification on certain points, rather than proceed and perhaps waste a little bit of time, or perhaps not quite follow the route that we would hope you would have followed. So always ask questions, and there'll be contact details on one of the slides at the end of this presentation. So today, looking at non-standard routes to membership, recent changes, and particularly the changes to the associate grade. So let's have a look at the routes to membership. And the first thing we need to do before we look at the non-standard routes is actually think about, well, what are the standard routes and what others are available? So the standard route is the one that by far the vast majority of people will follow, and we'll cover that in the next slide. But there will also be mutual recognition agreements. That's where we have agreements with other organisations, both in the UK and internationally, and we recognise some part of their qualification process, which exempts candidates from a certain part of our qualification process. You have the research and development route, which again we'll cover in more detail in the presentation, but is really designed for people who are involved in research. And then you have supplementary exams, which is a kind of mutual recognition agreement, but at the examination stage rather than the professional review interview and IPD. Now, the key thing to note when you're looking at all the different routes and all the different ways that you can become a member, the standards remain the same. We don't change the standards, just the way in which you meet those standards might be slightly different. So the route changes, but not the standards. Irrespective of the route that you follow, you'll all have the right academic qualifications, you'll all have done a period of IPD, and you all have sat a professional review interview or an exam or the equivalent. So the standards remain the same. We make sure that you've reached the required standard. The route may differ according to your own particular circumstances. So the standard route, you should hopefully all be aware of it. Three main stages to becoming professionally qualified. First, you must satisfy the academic requirements. Secondly, you do your period of IPD. And thirdly, you pass your professional review, which is the PRI interview and the exam or the equivalent. So the vast majority of candidates will go through the standard route. And what does that look like? If we look at that diagram, up at the top, you'll see academic base, and I've used chartered membership again as an example here. Academic base for chartered membership, which is an accredited MEng degree or the equivalent. If you go down through the chart, you'll see chartered membership IPD, so you do your period of IPD. That could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, however long it takes you to satisfy the core objectives. And you then go on to your professional review, which is the PRI and the exam. And you can take the PRI and the exam in any order, But once you've passed both of them, you then go on to be elected MI/D, standard route. Now, where does the MRA come in? So if you look to the right-hand side of that diagram, you'll see you still need the academic base for chartered membership. So you still need to have an MEng or the equivalent. But rather than doing the Institution of Structural Engineers, IPD, or the Institution of Structural Engineers professional review interview, you will have gone through a similar process with another institution. Now, we will have looked at their processes, we'll have mapped what they do against our standards, and we will give an exemption, which means candidates progressing to MI/D miss our IPD, they miss our professional review interview, and they proceed directly to the chartered member exam. Upon completing the chartered member exam, they then go on to be elected MI/D. So that's where the mutual recognition agreement at the IPD and the PRI comes in. If you look to the left-hand side of the screen, where we have research route and supplementary exams, well, again, the same principle applies. You still have to have your academic base, MEng or the equivalent. You still need to do your IPD, you still need to do your PRI. But now, instead of doing the chartered member exam, you're going to do the research route or a supplementary exam. And once you've completed that research route, or once you've completed the supplementary exam, you are then elected to MI/D. So they're really the non-standard routes, with either an exemption at the IPD and interview stage or an exemption at the chartered member exam stage. And we'll go over that in a little bit more detail. So firstly, looking at mutual recognition agreements. If you'd joined us in the first of these 4 presentations, you will have heard me talk about mutual recognition, but at the academic level. So first and foremost, we do make sure that we recognize academic qualifications from around the world. It's not a case of your course has to have been accredited by the Institution of Structural Engineers or the Joint Board of Moderators. We will accredit degree courses in Europe, and that's through the European Engineering Education Database. And we'll accredit or recognize degrees and sub-degree qualifications from around the world through agreements such as the Washington Accord, the Sydney Accord, and the Dublin Accord. Now, if you want more information about how we recognize different academic qualifications from around the world, then you need to go back to the first presentation where we discussed that in some detail. But the key point here, we recognize international academic qualifications. We also then have mutual recognition agreements at the IPD and the PRI level. So as I said just a minute or two ago, we will basically look at another organization, and let's take the ICE, for example. And we'll say, right, what does your IPD look like? What does your professional review look like? How does that compare with the standards that we set for our initial professional development and our professional review interview? And if the standards are predominantly or pretty much substantially the same, then we'll say, okay, we can recognize that as being equivalent, and we can give an exemption from the IPD and the interview. Now, the key point here is they're not identical. We're not saying what the ICE may do or what Engineers Australia may do or what Engineering New Zealand may do will be identical to what we do, but there is something called substantial equivalence. It's sufficiently of the same style, the same competencies are being assessed, that we're comfortable that that IPD and interview process matches the standards that we have set. As with the mutual recognition agreements, and as I've said previously, the fact that we're giving an exemption from the interview doesn't change the fact that you still need to have the right academic qualifications. And if you want to go on to pass the chartered member exam, you still need to go on and pass, if you want to go on to MI/D, you still need to go and pass the chartered member exam. So this is just an exemption from the PRI and the IPD stage based on what the other organization is doing. So what organizations do we currently recognize? Well, there's multiple. We have several organizations where we've undertaken this mapping process. Institution of Civil Engineers, Engineers Ireland, Engineering New Zealand, Engineers Australia, Hong Kong Institution of Engineers. That's just a few examples of the different institutions that we recognize. Now, the list can change. Sometimes organisations will join, sometimes organisations will lapse from that list. It is dynamic. And also you need to be aware that sometimes when we enter into an agreement with an organisation, there are specific requirements. So for example, if you take Engineers Australia covers multiple disciplines, as does the HKIE, multiple disciplines. So civil, structural, electrical, mechanical, chemical. Now, we're not saying if you're a member of Engineers Australia in the chemical discipline, we automatically recognise it. So there is a further restriction there, and we say you have to be registered with Engineers Australia through the structural engineering discipline. The same applies with the HKIE. You must be registered with the HKIE through the structural college or the structural discipline. So it's always best to check with the membership department and say, right, I have gone through a professional qualification with another institution. Number one, is that institution recognised by the IStructE, yes or no? If it is recognised by the IStructE, are there any special requirements that I need to be aware of, such as being registered in a particular discipline or a particular college? So any queries, always check with the membership department. So that's mutual recognition agreements. And if you have gone through the qualifying process with an organisation that we recognise, and you've gone through the standard route, had the PRI, etc., then there's a good chance that we will recognise that and you will be exempt from our IPD requirements and our professional review interview. Now, if we move on to the next stage now, and we're looking at the research and development route, this is quite a niche route. Not many candidates go through this particular route. If you look at the number of candidates that we might get through the chartered member exam in a year, you might be looking at around about 900 candidates or so. If you're looking at the research and development route, you might be looking at 9, 10, in a good year, 15, something like that. So a very significant difference in the number of candidates who are coming through the research and development route as compared to the standard chartered member exam route. But let's have a look at what the research and development route is all about. Let's go back to the first diagram that I showed you. You still need to satisfy the academic requirements. You still need to do your IPD. You still need to have a professional review interview. You now go through the research route. So the research route is in lieu of the chartered member exam. If you get through that research route and that exercise, then you'll be elected to MIStructE and you can register with the Engineering Council as CEng. So it's designed for individuals who are active in research and or development work. And what does that mean? The vast majority of candidates will be academics who are involved in leading cutting-edge research within their respective universities. So they still need to have the academic base. That very rarely is a problem for this particular group of candidates because they tend to be professors or senior lecturers. They have first degrees, second degrees, PhDs, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, the standard remains the same. You must have an accredited MEng degree or the equivalent. They must still pass their professional review interview. Now, there is a slight difference here insofar as the core objectives remain the same, but the evidence that they will use to demonstrate compliance with those core objectives will be different. If you're working in a university, the evidence that you'll put forward would be very different as compared to an individual working for a large multinational company, or an individual working for a smaller company, but dealing with day-to-day design projects. You will demonstrate your competence in a slightly different way, but again, the standard remains the same. You must pass the professional review interview and you must satisfy the 10 core objectives. Instead of sitting the chartered member exam, candidates submit a research report and a portfolio of publications. So the report will cover the research that they've undertaken, where that research has been published, whether they've been the principal author or co-author, the names and the details of the internationally recognized journals where their work has been published. All of that is submitted to the institution and it is reviewed by the application and professional review panel. So that particular group of members will sit down and there'll be academics involved in this process and they'll say, right, is that research at the cutting edge? Is it sufficiently advanced, and has it evolved over time such that we agree that the person has met the Chartered Structural Engineer standard. Now, what does that mean? There's no hard and fast rule, but we would tend to say a candidate should have at least 5 publications that have been published in internationally recognized journals. Now, it's guidance. It's not an absolute rule. Some candidates may have 4 publications and they might be absolutely fantastic, cutting edge stuff. Great. It's the quality that we're looking for. But to give some form of guidance, we're saying normally we'd expect 5 high quality papers published in internationally recognized journals. We would not normally accept PhD work. So we're looking at a level of research beyond your PhD. And it is leading edge stuff. So the candidate submits that documentation, the application and professional review panel will look at it, and then they will respond back to the candidate and say, yes, you've either met the standards that the institution requires, in which case, having satisfied the academic requirements, having passed the professional review interview, and now having passed the research review, the individual can be elected as MI Struct D and a Chartered Structural Engineer. So that's the research route. Again, if you're interested in that, there is additional guidance on the institution website, which sets out what we're really looking for in that research portfolio. But any questions, contact the institution's membership department. So now we're moving on to the other potential area where you can get exemption from the chartered member exam, and that's the supplementary exams. So what are supplementary exams? Well, they're designed for individuals who've already demonstrated some of the chartered structural engineer competencies that we're looking for, but through another written examination. So again, as I mentioned earlier, with the PRI, we're not saying that the exams are identical, but we're saying that they're sufficiently similar and they've covered some of the material that will allow us to give you an exemption. But if there are any gaps, they must be tested through an additional exam, and that's called the supplementary exam. So candidates will still need to satisfy the academic requirement, the accredited MEng or equivalent. They still need to pass their professional review interview, but instead of sitting the 7-hour chartered member exam, they will submit evidence of the other examinations they have taken and say, look, I've passed the exams with this organization, where we have done a mapping exercise, and therefore I want to go through the supplementary exam route. So let's have a look at one type of supplementary exam, and it's very much an internal type of recognition, because we're recognizing that if an individual has become an incorporated member, so that's IEng, IMI Struct D, well, they will have already satisfied the academic base for IEng, they'll have already done the professional review interview for IEng, and they'll already have done the 7-hour incorporated member exam. So all of that's done to enable them to become an incorporated member, IEng, IMI Struct D. Now, if that individual then wants to transfer from incorporated membership to chartered membership, what do they need to do? Well, again, the standards don't change, it's just the route. So they still need to satisfy the chartered academic base. They still need to pass the full chartered professional review interview. But instead of sitting the full 7-hour chartered member exam, they take a supplementary exam. So what we've done is we've looked at the exam that they sat as part of their incorporated membership process. We've looked at the chartered member exam and we've said, right, we don't want to duplicate assessment. If you've already shown a certain level of competence in the incorporated member exam, we're not going to test you again on that same material. So instead, we're going to focus on the things that you weren't tested on in the incorporated member exam. So you now have a shortened chartered member supplementary exam. And in this case, it's a 3.5-hour exam, and it's really focusing on conceptual design rather than the analysis that would have formed a large part of the incorporated exam. So that's one example of a supplementary exam. We've looked at the incorporated member exam, we've looked at the chartered member exam, we've mapped them, identified gaps, and said, right, if you are an incorporated member, IMI Struct D, and you want to progress to chartered membership, assuming you've satisfied the academic base, and pass the chartered member professional review interview, you'll do a 3.5-hour exam rather than the full 7-hour chartered member exam. One example of a supplementary exam. The other examples of a supplementary exam are international. So this is where we've looked at written examinations around the world, and we said, let's do the mapping exercise. Let's avoid duplication. Let's make sure we're not asking candidates to go through the same sorts of assessments again and again and again. So Singapore is an example of this. If you have become registered with the PEB, which is the Professional Engineers Board in Singapore, and you've taken the requisite exams, we will recognize those exams, and that will give you an exemption from the chartered member exam. Instead of sitting the full 7-hour chartered member exam, we look at the, I think it's 8 hours of examinations that the candidates have taken in Singapore. Then we will say to the candidates, you need to sit a supplementary exam, which lasts for around about 90 minutes. And then there's a verbal examination, which lasts for around about an hour. And the supplementary exam and the conceptual design, the supplementary exam and the verbal exam are all focused on conceptual design. So again, it's a case of saying, we looked at what you've done with the PEB in Singapore. We've looked at the exams that you've sat. We've gone through a very careful mapping exercise and process, and we've identified the gaps. The supplementary exam plugs those gaps. So that's one example of where we've used a supplementary exam, and in this case in Singapore. And that exam is run on an annual basis and has been run on an annual basis for the last few years. We've previously held supplementary exams in China and the US, but we haven't run them for some time. In China, we stopped running the supplementary exams. I think it was back in 2017 was the last one. Why? Because legislation changed in China and it made it difficult to run that sort of examination without going through quite an extensive registration process. So we haven't run the supplementary exam in China for many years now. USA, it was a case of COVID disrupted activity in the USA for a while. And really, there hasn't been a huge demand for candidates in the USA who have to be SE registered to sit our supplementary exam. So we haven't run the USA exam since, I think it was 2019. So that's an example of the supplementary exams in an international context. So the one that is currently running is Singapore. And if you have passed the PEB exams in the structural discipline, you may be exempt from our full chartered member exam, and you may be eligible to go through the supplementary exam. If you've got any questions or queries regarding that, then clearly you contact the membership department and we will be able to confirm your eligibility. So just to recap, the standards haven't changed. You still need to satisfy the academic requirements. You still need to pass your professional review interview, but the examination route has changed, either through the research and development route, which is one option, or through the supplementary exams, which is the second option. Any queries, contact membership. Right, finally, moving on to the last stage or last part of this presentation, which is recent changes, and in particular, the associate grade. So we made these changes in September of 2023. And traditionally, or prior to that, you would have had the academic base, the IPD, the interview, the exam, and you would have become MI Structee. If you had passed the professional review interview with another organization, you could have gone through an MRA and been exempt from our IPD and interview requirements. Or if you'd gone through the supplementary route or the research route, you could have been exempt from part of our examination requirements. So that was the standard route that operated for decades. As of September 2023, we introduced a variation to that. And we said, okay, if an individual has the requisite academic qualification, so the MEng or equivalent, if they've done their IPD, and if they've passed their professional review interview, before proceeding to the chartered member exam, they could stop off and say, right, I want to be registered as an associate AI Structee, and I want to be registered with the Engineering Council as CEng. So that was a new route, a new option that was available. Now, if you become CEng AI Structee, you can stay at that grade. That's fine. There's no requirement for you to move on. But having got that grade, if you then want to go on to sit the chartered member exam and progress to MI-Struct-E, that's fine. That's an option for you. And indeed, we would expect the majority of people who become CEng AI-Struct-E to go on to sit the exam and then become MI-Struct-E perhaps a year or two later in their career. So the recent changes, the candidates again must have the MEng or the equivalent. They must have passed the professional review, and they must have passed it within the last 3 years. Now, why is there a particular time period associated with this recent change? It's to do with Engineering Council registration. So the Engineering Council across all the institutions, all the disciplines, ICE, IMechE, IChemE, they say, once you have passed your professional review interview, you have 3 years to register with the Engineering Council. And they have given that time frame because they said that ensures that current competence and commitment has been assessed. If you delay your registration beyond 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, they're saying, okay, that's not current anymore. So current is described as being within that 3-year window. So when we introduced this rule and this new route, we said, okay, if you want to go forward for CEng registration, then you must have passed your professional review interview within the last 3 years. If you passed it 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the Engineering Council will not accept you for CEng registration. Our routes to membership align with CEng and IEng registration, and therefore the Engineering Council rule, 3-year rule, applies to us as well. So you have to have passed your PRI within 3 years in order to transfer from graduate through to associate. Why have we done this? Well, when you look at the different Engineering Council requirements and you look at the institution requirements, you can see on the left-hand side, the Engineering Council says you must satisfy the academic standard, accredited MEng or equivalent. You must do a period of IPD, you must do a period of, you must be tested then in your professional review interview. Now, at that point in time, for most other institutions in the UK, at that point in time, the individual has satisfied all the requirements for the Engineering Council and they can become CEng registered. We go through the same process. You need to have the MEng or the equivalent. You need to do your period of IPD. You need to do your PRI. But previously, there wasn't an option for you to register with the Engineering Council at that point, at that cutoff point. Instead, we insisted that you go on to sit the 7-hour chartered member exam or the equivalent, become MI-Struct-E before you could register as CEng. We thought that was a little bit unfair. So we said, okay, let's make sure that our candidates are treated in exactly the same way as candidates from other institutions. So now, if you have the accredited MEng, if you've done your IPD and you've passed your professional review interview within the last 3 years, you can register as an associate and you can register with the Engineering Council as CEng. So what we're hoping to do is recognise the competence of graduates who have met the CEng requirements but haven't quite got to the stage where they can pass the exam and become MI-Struct-E. So you think about it, if you're a graduate just out of university with 1-2 months of experience, okay, you're a newly qualified graduate. If you're a graduate with 5, 6, 7 years of experience, you're a very different individual. You've demonstrated and gained a lot of experience and demonstrated competencies, etc. So if you can pass your professional review interview, and if you've satisfied the academic base, that competence should be recognised. And so that's why we're now saying candidates can become an associate with us, AI-Struct-E, and can register with the Engineering Council as CEng. AI-Struct-E is a stepping stone. So clearly, hopefully better for you, the candidate, hopefully better for the employer who can say, right, I've got an associate now, they're CEng registered with the Engineering Council, and they can go on to become MI-Struct-E in a year's time, 2 years' time, however long it takes. It's better for the institution as well, because we have people who are going through a process and are engaged in that process. It's more inclusive. We have received some criticism in the past that perhaps an individual is working in an area where there isn't a question in the chartered member exam. So, for example, if they were working in temporary works, well, there's no temporary works question in the chartered member exam. If they were working in the offshore, oil, gas, wind, you know, again, there isn't a question that perhaps reflects that sort of experience. Nuclear, again, there isn't a nuclear question. So what we have is we can now take those individuals who clearly are working within the structural engineering environment and say, okay, there is a way for you to become professionally qualified with us, can become an associate with us, you can register with the Engineering Council as CEng, and you can stay at that grade if you want. If you want to go on to chartered member and MI Structee, then clearly you need to sit the exam or go through one of the alternative routes. But at least there is a grade there for those people where perhaps there isn't a question that reflects their experience. Hopefully it'll be improved retention rates. People will see this as a good way of progressing through their careers and reaching certain milestones on what hopefully will be the ultimate goal of MI Structee. And it differentiates MI Structee from CEng and other professional titles. So you can see associate equals CEng, MI Structee, you have to pass the 7-hour exam, and that's quite unique to the institution of structural engineers as far as registration in this country, the UK, is concerned. So that's why we've done it. Thus far, it's been very well received. We've had lots of candidates who have satisfied the MEng requirement and have passed the professional review interview within the last three years, who have decided to register as associate, AI Structee, and register with the Engineering Council as CEng, whilst they're preparing to sit their chartered member exam. So it's been well received by candidates, it's been well received by industry. Companies are now saying, oh yeah, we quite like to register people as associate, CEng AI Structee, great. We'll progress them to MI Structee when they're ready. So it's flexibility, it's inclusivity. If you want to progress direct to MI Structee, you can do so. But if you want to stop off at AI Structee, again, that's an option that's available for you. So that's the recent changes to AI Structee and why we've done them. That's the membership department, our contact details. So the email is membership@istructee.org. Any queries about any aspect of membership, academic qualifications, IPD, the interview, the exam, or non-standard routes such as MRAs, supplementary exams, the research and development route, contact the membership department and they will be able to help you out. Right, on to questions. So Darren, if you've got the chat available, can read out some of the questions. Hopefully I'll have some answers.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that, Darren. That was superb. Yes, just to make everybody aware, we've got the CPD certificate attached as well to the chat box, so feel free to download for your records. Yes, I'll read the questions now. So starting with the first question which has come in. For the IMI to MI route, so I imagine that's incorporated member to full membership route, is this applicable to older incorporated member engineers? I've been incorporated member and IEng since 1994, but I do not have a degree qualification at ONC or HNC only.
Yeah, a very good question, and it is applicable. Because how we recognize your academic qualifications, yes, you may not have the MEng degree, but you'll have a series of qualifications that the institution has recognized. And when you consider all of those qualifications together, you'll have met the academic requirement. So for example, you might have a HNC, a HND, which was the standard that applied at that time for what was then called associate, now incorporated membership. You've then gone on to pass the professional review interview for incorporated membership. You've gone on to sit what was the associate member 7-hour written exam. When you look at that combined package, that brings you up to the equivalent of a BEng honours degree. You're then going on to sit the chartered professional review, so the full chartered professional review interview, and you're going on to sit the supplementary exam. When you put that together as a suite of qualifications, that will satisfy the academic requirements for chartered membership. So it's how you use the institution's exams and the institution's interviews to show that you've gained the right academic knowledge in order for you to progress to chartered membership. So irrespective of when you became professionally qualified as an incorporated member, you can use this route to go on to become chartered if you so wish.
Okay, thank you. I am currently working towards chartered membership with Engineers Ireland, and I hope to obtain this qualification in 6 months. However, I have a BS and MSc from universities in Turkey. Unfortunately, despite my university being one of the top 3, it is not a member of the Washington Accord or a similar agreement. Does this mean I am not eligible to take the exam?
Not necessarily. I think you need to go back and look at the first presentation where we looked at academic qualifications, because what you may be describing is a combination or a suite of qualifications that aren't recognised by the Washington Accord. That's okay. There is another way for us to look at your academic qualifications. And generally, what we would do, if the qualifications are not accredited by this institution, IStructE, or they're not recognised under an international agreement called the Washington Accord or Dublin Accord, Sydney Accord, one of those agreements, we'd say, give us your certificates, give us your academic transcripts where we can see the modules you've studied and the marks that you've gained, and if you've got them, give us your syllabus. That is submitted to the institution's academic qualification panel, and the panel will look at your qualifications on an individual case basis. So they'll map what you've done against what we would expect to see in an accredited MEng degree. And a BSc plus an MSc, hopefully the panel will say, yeah, those 2 qualifications, when put together, satisfies all the things that we'd expect to see in an MEng, in which case we will recognise your academic qualifications. That being the case, you're free to go on to apply for chartered membership. If you've already gone through the professional review interview with Engineers Ireland and gone through their standard route, great. That means you should be exempt from our IPD and our interview, and you'd go on to sit the chartered member exam. But the first step is confirming your academic qualifications, and that's through an academic assessment. So you'd need to contact the membership department and say, I need this academic assessment to confirm your academic eligibility. Once that's confirmed, wait for you to get through the process with Engineers Ireland, hopefully exempt from the interview, and then you can go and sit our exam directly.
Okay, brilliant. So is there an alternative to satisfy the academic base for CEng without an accredited MEng degree? I currently have a BEng degree working towards IEng. Can I bridge the gap for the academic base to the CEng through a technical report or research route, for example?
Yeah, again, I think this is one that we covered in the first presentation. If you have an IEng degree or you're working towards an IEng degree, well, one option is go for incorporated membership. Get the necessary experience, do your IPD, become an incorporated member. So that would be IEng, IStructE. You're then at the BEng honours level. You can then go on to take the chartered professional review interview and the chartered member exam, and you're then a chartered structural engineer. So one way of satisfying the academic base is to do the institution's examinations and move from incorporated through to chartered membership. So that's one option. If you decide, well, actually, I don't want to sit the incorporated professional review interview, I don't want to sit the 7-hour incorporated member exam and then go on to sit the chartered interview and the chartered exam, okay, that's fine. You might decide you want to do that top up, the academic top up, immediately. You'd have an IEng degree, you need to go again for an academic assessment. So you'd say, right, what does my IEng degree cover? What modules did I study? What marks did I get? And you could find a situation where you've scored very highly in the subjects that we would be looking for: structural analysis, structural design, geotechnics, materials, those sorts of subjects. And the academic qualification panel could turn around and say, okay, we've looked at your degree, we like what we see, you need to go away and do further learning, such as an MSc or a technical report route A, in order to bridge the gap from an IEng degree up to the MEng degree. So that's one option. If your IEng degree doesn't have the right sort of modules, or you haven't scored particularly well in the modules that we're looking for, then the decision might be different. And they say, okay, we want you to go away and do a couple of papers. And that might be in structural analysis, materials, geotechnics, and study those modules at a particular university at the CEng, BEng honours level. You do those modules, you pass the exams, then you go on to sit the MSc or the technical report route. Or the third option, you say, right, I'm going to write a longer technical report route that bridges the gap from the iEng up to the MEng, but that is a bigger piece of work. It's more difficult, clearly. So there's lots of ways that you can bridge the gap from an iEng degree up to the MEng degree. But the first step is taking that academic assessment and finding out, what does your iEng degree look like? What modules have you studied? And how does that compare to the MEng standard? The academic qualification panel, and I used the term individual case procedure earlier, it's all about your individual qualifications. So it doesn't, a person could have studied the same exams, got the same degree as you, even got the same classification in their degree as you, but you could still come out with different decisions from the academic qualification panel, because it depends on the modules you studied and the marks you got in those modules. So apply for the academic assessment, find out what you'd need to do, and then you've got different options as to how you bridge the gap from the iEng to the MEng degree, whether that's by doing top-ups now or by going through the iEng route and becoming incorporated and then progressing to chartered. It's up to you to decide.
Okay. Is there any advice you can give for those taking technical report route B?
Technical report route B, I'll be honest, is difficult. You're bridging quite a significant gap, and that's from normally an iEng level up to a chartered level. It's longer than the technical report route A, which is bridging from a BEng honours that's been accredited as really 3/4 of the MEng. The technical report route A is around about 5,000 words. Technical report route B is a bigger piece of work, normally about 10,000 words. Always look at the guidance. Always make sure that you are focusing on your academic achievement. So remember, the technical report route is about showing the underpinning maths and science, your structural analysis, your structural design, your geotechnics, your materials, those sorts of core subjects. It's not IPD. We're not saying, have you got ability in design or ability in conceptual design. We're saying, have you done work that will enable you to demonstrate that you'd have covered through your work the same academic elements that you would have covered had you stayed on at university and studied up to the MEng requirement. So it's always thinking about the academic focus rather than the IPD. If you've got a mentor, always take advice from the mentor, who hopefully would be able to guide you. And if you've got any queries, again, just contact the membership department. We can contact the academic qualification panel. We can put your questions and queries to them. At the end of the day, we want you to get through the technical report route as much as you want to get through the technical report route. So any questions, just contact the membership department and we can put it to the panel.
Okay. Although this one appears to have already been answered in the chat box, I'll just run it by you for completeness. But it says, if you pass the CM exam, do you still need to pass the PRI?
Yes. The professional review is two parts, the interview and the exam. So why do we have two parts? Well, firstly, in order to become registered with the Engineering Council, you need to have a professional review interview, and it needs to cover quite a wide range of competencies. And those competencies are set out in the Engineering Council document called UK Spec. Now, we've contextualized that and turned that standard into a structural engineering standard. And therefore, you need the interview to cover all the things that the Engineering Council would expect you to cover, because not everything will be covered in the exam. So, for example, when you're talking about quality assurance systems or some of the legal things or, law, those sorts of things are not covered particularly well in the exam. So that's why you need the interview. That's why you need the exam. Now, some people will say, well, if you've got the interview, why do you need the exam? It's all about making sure we set high standards. And the interview is tough. It is a robust test, but we're testing you on stuff that you should know. In the professional review interview, you're presenting projects that you've worked on. You should know those projects inside out. You may have had support and guidance from your peers or from your mentors. So you should be quite well prepared for that professional review interview, and you're discussing things that you've already worked on. Well, the Chartered Member exam tests slightly different things. In that sort of environment, you're working independently, so you don't have your colleagues or your boss to check. You know, you can't bounce ideas off them. You're on your own. Also, it's an unseen project. So it really is a test of, wow, I didn't work on this project. I'm going to have to take this from scratch. So it's a difficult test. It's perhaps a more robust test, but the institution's dealing with structural safety, public safety. We need to ensure that people who want to become chartered structural engineers or incorporated structural engineers, they have to be the best. And therefore, we not only have the interview, we have the exam, because we want to be able to say to the public, when these individuals go out and they're working on your projects, we know they're safe, we know they're competent, because we've tested them through the interview and through the exam. That's why we have both assessments.
Okay. Are there any restrictions on how long you can remain at AI Struct T without proceeding to MI Struct T?
No restrictions at all. So as long as you pay your subscriptions, as long as you submit your CPD when you're requested to do so, and as long as you abide by the code of conduct, then you can stay at AI Struct T for as long as you want. And equally, you could be at AI Struct T for 5 or 10 years and then decide, well, I want to go and have a crack at MI Struct T and take the exam. There's no time limits. So AI Struct T, you can stay at that grade for however long, and equally, you can choose to go for MI Struct T at any point in the future.
Okay. What other things are the iStruct T looking at to try and draw more people into this professional qualification?
Oh, crikey, that's a big question. Well, if you start at square one, clearly we engage with organisations like Engineering UK, the Royal Academy, different organisations to try and encourage students, school children around the world to engage in STEM subjects. Keep your options open, make sure you're doing your maths, make sure you're doing your sciences, make sure you're doing your design, even your art and the creative sort of things, but keeping your options open so that when you get to the time when you're thinking about university courses or college courses, something like that, then engineering becomes an option for you. The last thing we want to see is someone at the age of 9 saying, oh, that's it, I hate maths or I hate science, I'm never going to become an engineer. So there's a bit of work that goes in there, and we work with those larger organizations to develop careers materials, etc. Once we get towards student membership, it's saying, okay, make it accessible. So whether you're on an accredited course or whether you're on a non-accredited course, we don't mind. If you're interested in becoming a structural engineer, then join us as a student member. Take advantage of the benefits, the products, the services that we offer. Student membership's free, so there shouldn't be a barrier to people joining as students. Hopefully you have a good experience. We then transfer those individuals who have qualifications, degrees in civil or structural engineering into graduate membership. And again, we give the first year of graduate membership free. We want people to use our products, our services. And we recognize that after a year, some of those members will say, no, structural engineering is not for me. My career is going off in a different direction, and that's fine. But we're giving them the option of being a graduate member for a year, hopefully having that positive experience and then choosing to stay with us. What we're then trying to do is create as many flexible and inclusive routes as possible. So we could make life simple. And actually, an individual asked this question in a previous presentation: why do you have so many routes to membership? Why is it all so complicated? And if you go back to when I first started at the institution, it was very simple. You had to have the right degree, you had to do your period of IPD, you had to do your interview, you had to do your exam. That was it. And if you didn't fit in to those particular boxes, then there wasn't a place for you within the institution. Well, we didn't want that. We wanted to make sure that irrespective of your academic qualifications, there will be a way for you to top up those qualifications to meet the academic standards for technician, incorporated or chartered. Whatever type of IPD you're undertaking, whether it's at big companies, small companies, or you're active in universities research, there will be a way of recognizing your IPD and allowing you to get through the professional review interview. More recently, there's a way of now recognizing that competence through the associate grade. When you're looking at the exam, okay, we have the chartered member exam, the incorporated member exam, but again, we wanted to be more flexible, we wanted to be inclusive, and we wanted to make sure we were being more candidate focused. We didn't want a situation where a candidate who passes a particular interview in Australia, for example, comes to us and we say, no, we're just going to ignore all of that. You know, we still want you to sit our interview. We don't want to duplicate assessment. We want to streamline it. Now, the standards, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, remain the same. We have to be confident in the standards, but we're just changing the routes to be as flexible and inclusive as possible. When it comes to the exam, making sure people who have disabilities have reasonable adjustments, the same with the interview, trying to be inclusive and make sure candidates have the opportunity, an equal opportunity, to pass the interview and the exam. Even things like changing the day of the exam. When I first started at the institution, it was always on a Friday. We became a little bit more international. We became a little bit more inclusively orientated, and we were told, well, Friday perhaps isn't the best day of the week for certain members or certain candidates in certain parts of the world. So we now rotate the exams, and we have it on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you know, that sort of thing. So it's just trying to be inclusive, flexible, and giving candidates who are interested in becoming professionally qualified a route to enable them to get there. Won't always be the same route as the colleague that they're sitting next to, but there will be a route to allow you to become professionally qualified.
Okay. What we'll say, somebody here is asking, in my case, I graduated in 1997 and had chartered membership with the IMechE since 2008, and currently as an associate membership of the ICE. Do I apply for AI-Struct-T first? And after how many years am I required to apply for MI-Struct-T if I take the CM exam?
Oh, well, the first thing we need to do is have a look at your academic qualifications and see what you're academically eligible for. So we'll look at that degree. And I believe you said there, Darren, it was accredited by the IMechE. So we look to see what recognition we'll give that degree. We'll then look to see what you've done with either the ICE or the IMechE and say, right, does that give you any exemption from the IPD and the professional review interview? And once we've established those facts, then we'll be able to map out a bespoke route for you and say, right, this is what you need to do academically. This is what we're recognizing from your IPD and professional review interview, and this is what you need to do as far as your exam is concerned. But you know, the best way of dealing with this is to contact the membership department and say, here's my academic qualifications, here's my professional qualifications, what's the best route for me? We can give you advice that is particular for you.
Right. Might be a similar answer for the next one. I have about 11 years of experience, and I do not know if there is a route for me to pass the IPD.
Well, the simple answer is yes. If you've got 11 years of experience, it's less about how long your experience is, but when you look at the 10 core objectives that we have for chartered membership, it's a question of, does your experience cover all of those 10 core objectives? Now, if it does, well, then there is a route that you will use to show how you've covered those 10 core objectives, and it's called the retrospectively collated route. So that's designed for individuals who haven't gone through any kind of formal training program, either with this institution or another institution. It allows the candidate to pick the projects that they want to put forward for assessment. And basically, they'll create a portfolio of work. And through that portfolio of work, they'll be able to say, here's how I've satisfied the 10 core objectives. You'll go for an interview based on that portfolio of work, and hopefully you'll be able to convince the two reviewers that you have indeed satisfied the IPD requirements and you've passed the professional review. But again, first stage, let's make sure you're academically eligible to go through this particular route. Then let's give you a bit of guidance about IPD. And as I said, I think it's the retrospectively collated route that you're following. Then we'll get to the interview and the exam. Any questions, contact the membership department and we'll make sure we're giving you advice that is particular to you.
Okay. If passing the PRI interview allows you to get CEng now, does it mean that in practice the PRI will be more thorough and difficult than in the past?
No, we don't expect the professional review pass rate for the interview to change. The same standards will be applied. Now, clearly, the IPD regulations have changed in 2023. There's a greater focus on sustainability and climate-related materials. So in that respect, there's been a change to the standard. But in terms of the pass rate, we see no reason why it shouldn't remain as it always has. And that's a range of around about 75 to 80% pass rate. We wouldn't expect it to drop. We wouldn't expect it to increase. Standards will be maintained. We'd like to think that candidates will prepare for the interview. They might be a bit better prepared, a bit better organized. Their submissions might be a bit better, that sort of thing. If that's the case, then the pass rates increase. But we're not going to make the interview different in terms of the standards. We'd expect them to remain the same.
Okay. I think you may have answered something similar to this a little while ago. Have I understood it correct? When I pass my PRI, it would be worthwhile to apply for the CEng title and do the exam whenever later without a time constraint to obtain the MI-Struct-T title. If I don't apply for the CEng title, then would I only have 5 years to pass the exam for the MI-Struct-T title?
Yeah, I mean, again, the first thing we've got to confirm is the academic qualifications. Are you eligible to go for the CEng AI-Struct-T title? Do you have the accredited MEng or the equivalent or not? So let's look at this and give two scenarios. An individual has studied a degree. It might be an MEng from the UK, or it might be an equivalent from somewhere else around the world, but they've got the academic standard. That individual often does maybe 3, 4, 5 years of experience. They do their IPD. Now they've got a choice. Do they want to go straight for MI-Struct-T? And they might decide that's what they're after, so they're going to go straight for MI-Struct-T. They can take the interview and the exam in any order. When they've passed both of them, they go on to MI-Struct-T. They might decide, no, I want to go for CEng AI-Struct-T first, in which case, take the interview, pass the interview, you can become CEng AI-Struct-T. At some future point, which could be a few years down the line, many years down the line, it's up to the candidate, they could then go on to sit the exam, and if they pass the exam, they become MI-Struct-T. Now, the issue really here is all about the 3-year rule. So if you're going straight for MI-Struct-T, if you take the exam first and you get the exam and you pass it, brilliant. You then take the professional review interview, you pass that, you're automatically going forward to MI-Struct-T. If, however, you take the interview first, then you've got to make sure you pass the exam within 5 years. If you don't pass that exam within 5 years, your interview isn't valid. Now, people might say, why is there a 3-year rule and why is there a 5-year rule? And it is a little bit confusing. The 3-year rule is the Engineering Council rule. And they said, right, once you pass your interview, you must register with the Engineering Council within 3 years as CEng. The Institution of Structural Engineers, some years ago when we first started discussing this, and this is 20 years ago, said, well, hang on a second, our guys have to pass the Chartered Member exam. That's quite tough. And the Engineering Council said, okay, we'll give you a bit of an extension because you got that 7-hour exam. You must pass the exam within 5 years, and then we'll still agree that your CEng or your interview is still valid. So if you're going through MI-Struct-T directly, you must pass the professional review interview and then pass the exam within 5 years, and then you can be registered. Alternatively, take the exam first, take the interview afterwards, and then there's no time limitations. You don't have to worry about it. If you're going for CEng AI-Struct-T, once you've passed the interview, you must register within 3 years. That would be quite simple. You can then take the exam at any point in the future. There's no time limitation. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do. A lot of candidates will say, oh, I'll take the interview first. I'll stop off at AI-Struct-T and then I'll go on to MI-Struct-T later. Other candidates have said, no, I want to go straight to MI Struct D. I see that as the gold standard. So I'm going to take the exam first, pass the exam, then I'm going to do the interview, and then I'm going to become MI Struct D. The flexibility is there, depending on what you, your employer, what your mentors think. It's up to you to decide, but all those options are available to you. But firstly, you've got to make sure you have the academic qualification.
Perfect. Okay, I think finally, the last question is, how long will it take for the recordings to be edited and uploaded online?
That's probably one of the questions I can't really answer because I don't do it. I'd say a couple of weeks. Once this final one is passed through to our marketing team, it'll be edited. So hopefully within two to 3 weeks, we'll get all 4 up onto the website.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of the questions. So thank you for that, Darren. And thank you to everybody who attended. I hope you got some. Oh, has another question just popped in? I think another question may have just come in for a bit of time for that. Are there any previous lectures on this subject already available online? I think there are, aren't there? Well, but there will be anyhow.
There will be 3 previous sessions, one dealing with academic qualification. So the individual who's talking about a BSc and an MSc from Turkey, those sorts of queries should be covered by the first presentation on academic qualifications. If you're interested in how to record your IPD and how to prepare for your professional review interview, then it's the second presentation that you're looking for that deals with the different routes through the IPD and the interview. If you're more interested in the exam, how you prepare for the exam, where you get the latest guidance on the exam, then it's the third presentation that you're looking for. And if it's more about, well, the different routes, mutual recognition agreements, research and development routes, supplementary exams, those sorts of slightly more weird and wonderful routes to membership, then it's this presentation that you're after. But I'll come back to the main point. If you're ever in any doubt, contact the membership department and we'll give you the information that is specific to your particular case.